the Italian Football Podcast.
Next question comes from Mr. Burns. Juventus were completely battered by Stuttgart. It was very alarming just how outplayed Juventus were. What went wrong, and is it a sign of Juventus' limitations in terms of challenging the best teams this season?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about this on the Thursday show as well, but I think that to summarise, it did... I mean, listen, Juventus were battered. They were completely battered from first minute to last, completely outplayed. They should have... If the result was fair, they should have lost 4 or 5-0. No exaggeration. Stuttgart's XG was like 2.7 or something. Juventus's was 0.3. They were completely outplayed, every department in every possible way. It was alarming just how much they were outplayed, because they were going to lose eventually. It's their first loss of the season. Eventually, it was going to happen. It was alarming by just usually a top team doesn't get outplayed like that. Generally, that's what's alarming about it. You wouldn't expect Inter, or you wouldn't expect the Manchester City or an Arsenal or a Liverpool or a Bayern Munich or a Real Madrid or Barcelona to be outplayed in terms of the overall game in the way that Juventus were last night. Like that shouldn't happen. You can lose, everyone can have a bad game, but not like that. That's what's worrying about it. So I think it is a little bit of a reality check of where Juventus are at. This is a team that probably on paper has been playing maybe above the sum of its parts so far this season, and that a lot, that's also down to great work of Motta. But I also think that on the other side of the coin, I think that Juventus, the number of players out injured and the absentees probably also took its toll in this game. That's not that's not an excuse, the only reason why it happened. But I think that when you're Juventus are without like 6 first teamers. Bremer, Gatti had a bit of a problem, so he didn't play. Cambiasso got rested. Koopmeiner's out. Douglas Luiz pulls up in the warm-up before the game. Locatelli gets rested. Gonzalez is injured. Milik, your only other striker options there. So you're without kind of half your first team. The other players that are playing, like Yildiz and Vlahovic, have basically had to play every game because there's no alternatives because of the injuries. So they go into this game and they're not fit. McKennie's rushed back, clearly wasn't fully fit. So I think it was just like physically, Juventus weren't at it. And I think that's down also because of the number of injuries. And Juventus have been playing with a real small group of players for a long time, and he played twice in 3 days. They played on Saturday against Lazio, then they play this game on the Tuesday. They've been also having to play kids and next gen players. I mean, Savona comes on. They've had no bench for much of this season. I mean, they had no bench against Lazio. I mean, look at the bench against Stuttgart. I mean, no players to bring on if you want to change the game. No striker to bring on. When Vlahovic is playing terrible, and you think, right, who can we bring on to try and make a difference and replace him? They didn't bring on a striker. They brought on Azzurri, a midfielder, to come on for Vlahovic. So they didn't have a striker for the last kind of 25 minutes. So, I think that the injuries did take its toll. That, and also the fact that, this is probably also a little bit of a reality check of where Juventus are at. It's a Juventus that is building something, and I'm quite happy with the start Motta's made, and I'm quite confident that Juventus are on the right path. Whether or not that will lead to a trophy this season, maybe not. Maybe it comes a bit too soon. But I'm still happy with where Juventus are going. But it is a reality check that there's a long way to go for Juventus.
I think that is absolutely, spot on. Yesterday, I was surprised. We're going to talk about this more on the Thursday pod, of course, the game itself. But I was very surprised by, frankly, how outplayed Juventus were. I didn't expect them to be this outplayed. And I didn't expect them to be this, dominated. And I'm not just talking about possession. I'm talking about the chances and the sheer number of chances that Stuttgart created. This is something we haven't seen in other Juventus games. If you were perfectly honest, in other Juventus games, Juventus have barely conceded any chances. And that's what we've been reacting to, saying how solid their defense is. But the red card came towards the end, and it was when so we can't really say anything about that. But I mean,
No.
just looking at the stats, first half, 58% ball possession for Stuttgart, XG of 0.04 for Juve, no, one shot on target, 12-1 for Stuttgart in the first half alone.
Well, Perrin
And
made
then
11
you look at the
saves
second.
in the whole game.
Yeah,
Says it all.
it's insane. And then you look at the second half. Okay, Juve had more ball possession, 58%. They created 0 big chances. They had 6 shots on target, but they didn't create anything. They had an XG of 0.2.
No,
So, but whilst Stuttgart
yeah.
have 1.77, I mean, regardless of what stat you use for XG, it's very obvious that Stuttgart completely dominated this game and deservedly won.
I
And
don't, it
even
was.
Motta said so himself. It was a deserved loss, which
Mm.
to me is the biggest surprise.
No, yeah. What was
I'm
surprising
mostly
about this?
surprised by that.
What was surprising about this was that Juventus have never been dominated, like possession-wise, like territory. They were dominated. They haven't been dominated like that. They've always been kind of like the team that has been controlling the game. Even against like Napoli, even Roma to an extent. They were the kind of like the masters on the pitch, even when they didn't play particularly well. But also like they weren't pressing at all. That's been a feature of Motta, and that is a feature of Motta's game. He wants his team to press. He wants them to run. They weren't pressing at all. They had nothing. It looked like physically they had no energy. They weren't able to get out of the press. Like Stuttgart were pressing really high, were pressing really high up. Juventus, they couldn't get out. They couldn't find out that those patterns of play, which we've lauded Motta for having those little triangles and the way to get up the pitch and work their way out of presses. They weren't able to do it at all. They couldn't. They couldn't. They could not get out at all. It looked like all the things I used to criticize. Now I'm making the Allegri comparison. All the things that we criticize, all the things that we criticize, all the things that I criticized Allegri for, not being able to get out of a press, not being able to have any patterns. Actually, we saw that against Stuttgart. You know, there was that. They were bad in every department. The defense was really bad. They were opened up really easily. The midfield were terrible. They couldn't control the game, and the attack was completely toothless. I mean, Yildiz again, after the really heavy criticism he got, he did nothing. He was completely blunt. And then Conceição had a few nice dribbles. Juventus really struggled on their right hand side. Savona looked like a next gen player. He has done in the last few
Yeah.
matches actually. My biggest concern though is I'm worried, certainly ahead of the Inter game, I'm worried that Juventus are really physically really in bad shape now. They even against Lazio, like they didn't have much energy. It was very slow, very sterile, very there wasn't any intensity in the Lazio game, and they were just fortunate with the fact that they were playing against 10 men for the whole game, that it wasn't a problem because of that, in terms of the result, getting a result. But against this Stuttgart team that run and they got so much intensity, they've also got a very good young coach. And that was the other thing that was surprised me in this game. This is the first time that Motta's been really kind of out coached or out thought. Like he had no answers. It was clearly wasn't working. What the Juventus were doing, their tactically, it wasn't working. He didn't have any answers. He didn't really seem to change things to kind of turn the tide. Hoeneß, who's a very, very good young coach, Sebastian Hoeneß, I was very, very impressed by him. It's a bit concerning. I'm just hoping it's a little bit more down to just kind of like physically they were just a bit dead going into this game.